Hello and welcome back to another ProGuides video. The higher elo you are, the more intricate the games become. It's not as simple as picking the best champions, items, or synergies. Sometimes you may get all the perfect units for your synergy, but can still lose if you don't position correctly. When you get to the top 4, positioning becomes the key to winning and the most crucial factor. Especially in the newest meta, positioning mechanics has been getting more and more advanced. Today, we're here to guide you on some of the best positions that you can do. But before we begin, remember to click our link below in our description to see more in-depth guides, builds, and ways to win you your next games. There are many courses designed by pro players within the top 1% of the game to teach you the meta and how to effectively climb up the ladder. So if you want to get to the top 4 of your games, then go to ProGuides.com today and we will see you there. Without any further ado, let's first go over the basics. The basic positioning of TFT is very simple. This is normally how you will place your units throughout early to late game. You want your tanks in the front and your squishies in the back. Simple, right? Just be careful about viewing some melee units as tanks. A common beginner mistake is having units like Fiora or Camille in the front because they're simply melee. These units are incredibly squishy, so it's best to actually put them in the second row or all the way to the left or right of your tanks against the border of the map. Another common mistake is putting a level 1 Kennen or Gnar in the front line. Yes, you want to put units that have CC towards the front so they can ult quicker, but always consider how squishy your units are. There's no point putting them in the front if they die before they get to use their ability. As such, having them in the second row is a much safer guarantee for their ability to get full use. Now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's go over more specific positions that you're most likely to encounter once you're in the top 4 of your game. First up is positioning against HEXTECHs. It's incredibly rare for someone to run 4 HEXTECHs, but 2 HEXTECHs is something you'll see pretty often. Unfortunately, HEXTECH targeting is random, so there's no for sure way to protect your units with items. However, you can try to minimize the damage as much as possible. The idea is simply to have a unit with no items in between your units that do. If your comp had all 3 items on your Draven, Lucian, or Jinx and your other units were lacking items, then see if there's any item components on your bench. A trick is to simply put that on another unit that you know you won't be placing next to your hyper carry. Even if it's just a spatula, the HEXTECH will now have a 50% to go for that unit instead of your stacked carry. If there's a lot of HEXTECH players though, be careful about stacking all items on just 1 or 2 units. Next is positioning against assassins. Wild assassins, ninja assassins, 6 assassins, the list goes on. These comps are incredibly popular in today's meta, so you may wonder, how the hell am I supposed to protect my carry against them? Rapid fire cannon is a great item to have on your unit so they can maintain a corner position. Your unit can be protected in the corner surrounded by other units with this item. However, since there's so many great bow items, you may not always have to make an RFC for your comp. In this case scenario, you have 2 options for positioning. The first option is if they're only running 3 assassins. See which side they're more dominant on. You can still keep the majority of your composition grouped up in one corner, but then put 1 solo unit on the opposite corner. That unit will be acting as a bait to get most of the assassins to jump on him first, which keeps your carry alive and away from being the first targeted. Now, the second option is if your enemies has 6 assassins or they're pretty spread out. In this scenario, you're going to need to put your carry in the middle of the map. Using Imperial Knights as an example, you could have a Mordekaiser to the left corner and Darius to the right corner. Then surround your Draven with all of your other units in the middle. Essentially, you're pretty much having 2 baits for the assassin unit and then full protection for your carry. Now that you have learned the counter, you may wonder what's the best positioning if you are the one playing assassins every single game. So let's talk about positioning with assassins. As many of you know, Frozen Heart is one of the strongest items right now. So whichever your assassin has Frozen Heart, put them in the furthest corner so they can apply the debuff to as many enemies as possible. Pyke is the best candidate for this item because he jumps the farthest and also the most often with his ability. It's also best to have your assassins spread out as much as possible to make it harder for your opponent to play around. Obviously, scout your enemies to see which side has the most carries so you can place your assassins in the opposite corner. Next is positioning against sorcerers. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You basically want to avoid having your units grouped up as most sorcerers' composition include a lot of AoE damage. Separate your group completely and have your carries as far away as possible from their sorcerers. Moving on is positioning against Blitzcrank. This one may seem pretty simple at first since Blitzcrank only pulls the unit furthest away from him, but be careful, as HEXTECH Brawlers is pretty popular in the meta, putting a weak unit you don't care about for Blitz to pull would just end up buffing their Jinx much quicker. Ideal units for the enemy's Blitzcrank to pull is actually a tank that you know they would have a hard time killing and can potentially CC their entire team. For example, Gnar with Warmogs and Dragonclaw would end up wrecking their entire back line once pulled. Or have the Blitzcrank pull a Sejuani so she can freeze the entire team. If you're the one running Blitzcrank, then simply switch him to the other side as soon as you see your opponent doing this. On to the next one is positioning against CC units. Similar to the others, you would want to move the majority of your composition away from CC units. CC units to watch out for include Sejuani, Cho'Gath, Kennen, and Gnar. However, it's not as simple as simply moving your units to the other side. If they're still grouped, then chances are the CC will still hit majority of your units. If your comp does rely on grouping to protect your hypercarries, try to have at least 1 or 2 units on the other side to bait out the Kennen or Sejuani ult early. Getting them to ult just a few units will end up being a huge advantage for your game. Next up is positioning with Zephyr. Zephyr is arguably one of the best items in the game if your opponent is not scouting diligently enough. It's also very difficult to play against if you position your equipped Zephyr last second. For beginners, Zephyr targets the unit on the opposite positioning of your equipped unit. This is also shown during the planning phase with a tornado so you can see it before combat. For Zephyr targeting, there's 2 options. You can either go for the hypercarry, who has every item stacked on them, or you can go for their main tank. Stopping their hypercarry for 6 seconds is a huge advantage in a combat, whereas on the other hand, getting rid of their tank allows you to quickly gain access to their back line. For example, if you Zephyr their Sejuani, not only will they not have a tank anymore, but you're also delaying the stun on your entire team. Another unique trick is actually putting your Zephyr on your Blitzcrank. If you see your opponents are simply putting one tank as the furthest unit, Zephyr will banish the tank immediately and then take the second farthest unit, which most of the time will be their carry. Zephyr with Blitzcrank makes it really hard for enemies to position against with the limited time during the planning phase to scout and change accordingly. Be careful about Zephyring their hypercarry though if you're running assassins. Although it can still be an advantage, it can also be very risky if you're actually protecting the carry from your assassins during the first 6 seconds. If you're able to get easy access to the carry, it might be better to not Zephyr it so your assassins can jump on them immediately. So speaking of Zephyr, let's talk more about how to position against and with items. A few notable ones to mention besides Zephyr is Hush, Zeke's Herald, Locket of the Iron Solari, Frozen Heart, Trap Claw, Redemption, Repeated Crossbow, and Thieves' Gloves. So first with Hush. Hush is incredibly strong in the meta as it stops the opponent from using their ability. It's perfect, especially against shapeshifters and units with CC like Sejuani and Kennen. Always scout to see which units have Hush so you can protect your ability-based units away from them. On the other hand, as a Hush player, put your equipped unit to the side where your opponents have those CC champions. Moving on to Zeke's Herald and Locket of the Iron Solari. If you run Assassins, you're pretty much all set since your positioning is normally all in one line already. If you're not running Assassins, then be careful not to make a few common mistakes. At times, people get too greedy for the full 5 units buff that they actually ruin their formation for it. If it's still mid-game with 5 to 6 units, then having all units in a line can still be beneficial. However, once you get toward the late game with 8 to 9 units is where you should be careful about lining up 5 units. Gauge on which units need to be prioritized for the buff. For example, in a Rangers build, you really only need your Rangers to have the Zeke's effect. No need to sacrifice your Sejuani's tank positioning because you want her to attack a little quicker. Next is Frozen Heart, which, as we mentioned, are perfect for units that jump around, thus any Assassins, Vi, or Pantheon. The Assassin that is Frozen Heart should be in the furthest corner, while Vi should be either all the way to the left or right side in order to get the highest effect when they jump. On to the next item is Trap Claw. Although most people may see this item as underwhelming, it can actually be pivotal if used correctly. Majority of the time, Trap Claw will be on a tank with CC or a hypercarry. You want to avoid having your best units proccing the shield and getting stunned, so be sure to scout for this item and put a weaker unit closer to them so they get stunned instead. The next 2 items are Redemption and Repeated Crossbow. For positioning, try to have the equipped unit towards an area where they're most likely to take damage. A common error is that people equip these items, but it never goes off until the end of combat because they gave the equipped such a safe position. On a side note though, Redemption is best paired with GA in the front lines, whereas Repeated Crossbow, well, it's best not to use that item. Lastly, in our items positioning list is Thieves' Gloves. The 2 temporary items are always shown during the planning phase. As it's random, there's a chance that they can proc any of the other items we mentioned, so make sure you pay attention so you can position accordingly to the items you get. And that is all for today. What are some position mechanics that you like to go for during your games? Let us know in the comments below as we read each and every one of those comments. Patch 9.20 will be out soon, so be sure to catch our video on Thursday morning that reviews everything and a brand new items tier list. We're almost at 10,000 subs, so be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see y'all next time.